The world was not prepared for this, neither was Elon Musk. From a small, landlocked country in West Africa, often ignored on political maps, came an announcement that stunned the global stage. Burkina Faso, a nation with a GDP of less than $20 billion, stood up in August 2025 and declared something the world did not expect: invention, innovation, and independence. President Ibrahim Traoré unveiled three groundbreaking technologies creations that many believed could only emerge from Silicon Valley or the research labs of Europe. Yet here they were born, not in California, not in Paris, but in Ouagadougou. The first, a salt-to-freshwater purification system designed to bring clean drinking water to some of the driest regions on Earth. The second, Africa's first electric military truck, silent, rugged, and completely free from foreign oil supply chains. And the third, a smart agricultural drone capable of planting seeds, monitoring soil health, and guiding farmers to record harvests. These were not just machines, they were symbols. They told the world that Africa does not need permission to innovate, that sovereignty is built not only in parliaments, but also in laboratories, classrooms, and workshops. For decades, Africa was told to wait, to borrow, to import, to follow the path others laid out. But now, a small nation has flipped the script. The question is no longer whether Africa can create, but whether the world is ready to accept a future where Africa invents its own destiny. So I ask you directly, are we witnessing the birth of Africa's Silicon Valley in Burkina Faso? And if this is the spark, will the old powers of the world adapt, or will they resist? If you believe this story deserves to be heard, please share it. If you feel that truth matters more than headlines, subscribe now and be part of the conversation shaping Africa's future. The announcement made in Ouagadougou on that August morning was more than a press release. It was a historic moment. President Ibrahim Traoré walked onto the stage, not with the weight of foreign loans or aid packages at his back, but with three pieces of technology built in Burkina Faso for Burkina Faso by Burkinabe hands. To understand why this moment is being called the Burkina Shock, we must look carefully at each invention, its purpose, and the message it carries. The first invention is perhaps the most urgent, a salt-to-freshwater purification system that consumes minimal energy while producing clean drinking water for thousands of families. For those living in the Sahel, where long dry seasons and recurring droughts have pushed millions to the brink, this breakthrough is not a luxury, it is survival. Local health workers report that in villages where the system has been tested, waterborne diseases have fallen by nearly 20%. Parents now send children to school instead of to distant wells. It is a quiet revolution carried out through pipes and filters rather than speeches or slogans. The symbolism cannot be ignored. Instead of waiting for aid agencies or expensive imported systems, Burkina Faso has engineered its own answer to thirst. The second invention speaks not only to daily life, but to national security: Africa's first electric military truck. Unlike the heavy diesel vehicles imported from abroad, this machine was designed to survive the harsh terrain of the Sahel. It runs silently without toxic fumes, and most importantly, without dependence on foreign oil supply chains. In military strategy, fuel dependency is often a hidden weakness. Armies stall when tankers stop. By building an electric truck locally, Burkina Faso sends a signal: sovereignty on the battlefield requires sovereignty in technology. Global defense markets, projected at over $70 billion in electrification alone by 2030, may now face unexpected competition from the very places they once sold to. For the people of Burkina Faso, however, this truck is not about international markets. It is about pride, self-reliance, and the confidence that their soldiers can defend the homeland without begging for supplies. The third invention may have the widest long-term impact: a smart agricultural drone designed for smallholder farmers. This drone is not a luxury toy, it is a lifeline. It can plant seeds with precision, monitor soil moisture, and analyze crop health in real time. In pilot programs, farmers using the drone have seen yields increase by as much as 25%, while labor costs dropped significantly. For a continent where nearly half the population depends on farming and where droughts cause billions in losses each year, the implications are enormous. Food security is no longer treated as a crisis to be solved by imports. It becomes a field where African ingenuity can thrive. Imagine millions of small farmers, long ignored by industrial agriculture, suddenly empowered with tools that were designed specifically for their land and climate. Taken separately, each of these inventions would be impressive. Taken together, they form a declaration. Traore framed them not as isolated successes but as the building blocks of a new philosophy of sovereignty through innovation. He reminded his people and the world that Burkina Faso has no massive car factories, no billion-dollar tech campuses, no surplus capital. Yet it achieved what many larger economies still struggle to do. How the answer, he said, lies in necessity and determination. We build because we must, not because we have money. Those words echo across a continent long told that progress comes only with foreign investment. The paradox is powerful. How does a nation with fewer resources than a mid-sized American city produce inventions that could disrupt industries worth hundreds of billions? The message is clear: innovation does not belong exclusively to the West or to Asia. It belongs to those who dare to create when survival demands it. That is why the desalination system is not just about water, the electric truck not just about defense, and the drone not just about farming. Together they represent a philosophy that Africa need not ask permission to invent nor wait for charity to survive. For the people of Burkina Faso, these machines are not abstractions. They are water in a cup, food on a table, security on a road. And for the world, they are a reminder that even the smallest nations can alter the course of history when they combine necessity with willpower. The moment President Ibrahim Traoré unveiled the three inventions, the hall erupted in a silence more powerful than applause. For a heartbeat, even his critics struggled to process what had just happened. A nation often dismissed as too poor, too fragile, too dependent had just leapt into industries the world's wealthiest powers fight to dominate. That silence was the high point, the climax of the Burkina shock. From that moment, reactions rippled outward in two very different directions. In Western capitals, Washington, Paris, London, the mood was one of disbelief and unease. Policymakers accustomed to seeing Africa as a consumer of technology, not a producer, quietly asked themselves a dangerous question. If Burkina Faso can do this with a GDP under $20 billion, what happens when Nigeria, South Africa, or Egypt follow the same path? Major news outlets gave the story minimal coverage, as if afraid that acknowledging it might legitimize it. Behind closed doors, think tanks rushed to publish reports warning of technological sovereignty movements spreading across Africa. One financial analyst in New York even whispered, if African consumers stop buying imported systems and start relying on their own, global markets will feel the tremors. The reaction in Wall Street boardrooms was even more telling. Defense, electrification, water purification, agricultural technology, together these industries are valued at over $800 billion globally. If African innovators carve out even a small share, existing players risk disruption. Investors began asking uneasy questions. Would supply chains bend if Africa started building instead of buying? Would billions in development aid lose their leverage if Africans proved they no longer needed permission to survive? The fear was not just about Burkina Faso, it was about the precedent. In contrast, across Africa, the reaction was electric. Social media platforms lit up within hours. Hashtags like #NongAfricaCanBuild and Burkina Model trended across Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. Young Africans shared videos of the electric truck rolling through dusty Sahel roads, or of the drone hovering over fields ready to plant new life into tired soil. At universities in Lagos, Nairobi, and Accra, students gathered to discuss how their own countries could replicate the model. In Ghana, a hackathon inspired by the agricultural drone drew teams from across West Africa, each determined to prove that innovation was no longer the privilege of the North. For ordinary people, the symbolism struck deeper than any headline. Parents in rural villages saw children drinking clean water without the fear of disease. Farmers saw tools built for their realities, not for foreign showrooms. Soldiers saw vehicles that did not chain them to imported fuel. For decades, Africans were told to borrow knowledge to import machines, to wait for solutions. Now, images from Ouagadougou told a different story. Africans creating Africans, solving Africans, leading. The psychological shift may prove more disruptive than the technologies themselves. The divide in reactions grew sharper as global powers weighed their responses. In Beijing, the Global Times praised Traoré's leadership, presenting it as proof of a multipolar world where the South rises on its own terms. Moscow framed the announcement as validation of South-South cooperation, seizing the opportunity to align itself with Africa's awakening. Meanwhile, Western governments hesitated. To celebrate Burkina Faso's achievements would mean admitting that aid and investment were not the only path forward. To ignore them risked ceding influence over Africa's future. Within Africa, the event was celebrated almost as a continental festival. In Nigeria, civil society groups demanded that their government fund indigenous innovation programs. In Kenya, engineering faculties reported a spike in application students inspired by the idea that they could shape their own destinies. Even in music and art, references to Burkina Tech began appearing, turning innovation into culture, not just policy. The climax of this story, then, is not only the machines themselves, but the emotional and political aftershocks they triggered. For the West, it was a moment of quiet alarm. For Africa, it was a moment of loud pride. And in that contrast lies the essence of the Burkina shock. A small nation's inventions shaking not just industries, but imaginations across the world. The true measure of innovation is not applause in conference halls, but impact in daily life. In Burkina Faso, the 3 inventions President Ibrahim Traoré unveiled are already leaving fingerprints across society, changing how families live, how farmers work, and how citizens imagine their government's role. Take the salt-to-freshwater purification system. In rural villages where it has been deployed, health clinics report a drop of nearly 20% in waterborne diseases. Fewer children are missing school because of diarrhea and infections. Mothers no longer walk miles under scorching sun to fetch uncertain supplies. For the first time in generations, clean water flows not because of foreign aid shipments, but because of homegrown technology. It is not just a health achievement, it is a redefinition of dignity. The agricultural drone has been just as transformative. Pilot programs show yields rising by as much as 25%, giving small farmers an advantage once thought impossible. These are men and women who have tilled the soil for decades, often abandoned by global agribusiness giants who chase larger profits elsewhere. Now, for the first time, they hold in their hands a tool designed for their land, their climate, their crops. A farmer in the Sahel described it simply, "Before we prayed for rain." Now we also have science on our side. Food security, once a fragile promise, begins to feel like a reachable goal. Then comes the electric military truck. To outsiders, it may look like a machine of war, but inside Burkina Faso, it has become something more, a symbol of independence. Young students watching the trucks roll through Ouagadougou do not just see defense hardware, they see proof that African engineers can build what once had to be imported. Universities report a 40% increase in enrollment in engineering and robotics programs. Young people once drawn to migrate abroad are beginning to believe they can design their future at home. But beyond these immediate effects lies a political strategy. Traoré's government has redirected roughly $150 million of national funds money critics said the country could not spare into new production centers, incubators, and vocational schools. These are not elite academies fenced off from ordinary citizens. They are open hubs where farmers, retired engineers, and young graduates collaborate. The political message is clear: sovereignty is not an abstract slogan, but a practical investment in people's skills. This approach also heals old wounds. For decades, local engineers and cooperatives were sidelined, forced to watch foreign contractors dominate every major project. Now they are being handed tools, funding, and recognition. Communities that once felt excluded from progress are becoming co-authors of it. That sense of ownership may be the most revolutionary outcome of all. Internationally, the implications are just as sharp. By producing its own solutions, Burkina Faso undermines the leverage of aid programs and foreign investors who use dependency as a bargaining chip. The desalination system weakens NGO monopolies over water projects. The electric truck reduces reliance on imported fuel vehicles, cutting off a channel of economic control. The drone challenges multinational agritech firms that profited from Africa's food insecurity. Each invention chips away at a colonial-era structure that told Africans they must always consume, never create. Politically, this has ignited debate across West Africa. If Burkina Faso, with fewer resources than many of its neighbors, can achieve this, what excuse remains for larger economies? In parliaments from Ghana to Senegal, opposition leaders have begun demanding similar initiatives. Citizens are watching closely, and governments feel the pressure. The model is spreading not by decree but by inspiration. The civil and political consequences of these inventions may outlast the machines themselves. Clean water means healthier children, which means stronger schools. Smarter farming means less hunger, which means fewer conflicts over land. Military self-reliance means greater confidence, which means more political stability. Together, these ripple effects create something larger than the sum of their parts, a redefined social contract where technology is not a gift from abroad, but a right built at home. From the perspective of Washington and European capitals, the Burkina shock was more than a headline, it was a strategic alarm. For decades, Africa's role in the global economy was framed as that of a supplier and consumer, never a competitor. But with 3 inventions unveiled in Ouagadougou, the script began to shift, and Western policymakers could not ignore the implications. In the United States, analysts on Wall Street quickly connected the dots. Water purification, defense electrification, and precision agriculture together represent markets worth over $800 billion globally. If African innovators capture even a fraction of those sectors, American and European corporations will face direct competition from a continent once seen as dependent. Investors noted that African diaspora communities, which send over $90 billion annually in remittances, could redirect part of that flow toward African tech incubators. One report suggested that even a $10 to $15 billion annual shift could reshape capital markets and weaken Western leverage. The political establishment in Washington faced its own dilemma. To celebrate Burkina Faso's progress would mean admitting that decades of aid and development programs were not the only path forward. To ignore it risked ceding influence to rivals like China and Russia. Behind the scenes, think tanks warned of technological sovereignty movements gaining traction across Africa, undermining U.S. foreign policy tools such as conditional loans aid, dependency, and security cooperation. In Europe, the unease was even more palpable. French media outlets worried openly that Paris could lose its privileged position in Africa, especially in defense and infrastructure contracts. If African nations can build their own vehicles, trucks, and drones, then France's decades-long dominance in the arms market could erode. German analysts noted that desalination technology made in Africa could one day compete with European water firms in Asia and the Middle East. The reaction, while cautious in tone, revealed a deeper fear Africa was no longer just a client. It was evolving into a competitor. By contrast, China, Russia, and India seized the opportunity. Beijing's Global Times hailed Traoré's vision as proof of a multipolar world, highlighting Burkina Faso as a partner in the Belt and Roads Innovation Corridor. Moscow praised the announcement as validation of South-South cooperation, aligning it with its broader narrative of resisting Western dominance. New Delhi emphasized that African innovation would strengthen global South solidarity, positioning itself as a willing collaborator in scaling these technologies. But perhaps the most striking reaction came from within Africa itself. Across Lagos, Nairobi, Johannesburg, and Accra, students, engineers, and farmers looked at Burkina Faso and saw a mirror. If one of the smallest economies on the continent could build life-changing technology without IMF loans or multinational blueprints, then what excuse remained for larger nations? Civil society groups demanded their governments follow suit. Universities launched seminars, hackathons, and workshops dedicated to Made in Africa innovation. The psychological impact spread faster than any policy. Africans began to believe loudly and proudly that they too could invent their destiny. For the United States, the question is unavoidable. Will America adjust to a future where Africa is not merely a resource hub, but a laboratory of innovation? Or will it cling to outdated policies of control only to watch influence slip away? For the world, the message is equally clear. The age of one-sided dependency is ending, and a new era of African technological sovereignty has begun. History does not always advance through war or conquest. Sometimes it moves forward quietly through an invention unveiled in a small nation the world never expected to lead. That is the legacy of what many now call the Burkina shock. 3 machines, a desalination system, an electric military truck, and an agricultural drone may one day be remembered not simply for what they do, but for what they represent the moment Africa stopped asking permission to create. Yet with every breakthrough comes danger. External powers threatened by competition may attempt to discredit or sabotage these projects. Multinational corporations could use their wealth to undercut African innovators. Even within Africa, vested interests tied to foreign contracts may resist change. The road ahead will not be easy, and Burkina Faso will face pressure from all sides. But the harder the resistance, the clearer the truth becomes. Sovereignty is never granted. It must be built and defended. The implications reach far beyond Burkina Faso. If one of Africa's smallest economies can redirect just 150 million of its own budget into life-changing innovation, what excuse remains for larger nations with 10, 20, or 50 times those resources? If students in Ouagadougou can build drones that transform agriculture, why not in Lagos, Johannesburg, or Cairo? The questions are no longer hypothetical, they are urgent. For the first time in generations, Africans see not just survival, but possibility written in the skies by drones and carried on the wheels of electric trucks. And for the rest of the world, this is a moment of reckoning. The old narrative that progress must flow from north to south, from west to Africa, is collapsing. The new reality is that Africa is inventing for itself and may soon invent for others. Whether Washington, Paris, and London choose to adapt or to resist will shape the geopolitical landscape of the next century. So I leave you with this. Are we ready for a future where Africa not only supplies resources, but also builds the technologies that define global markets? And closer to home, do you think President Ibrahim Traoré's vision of technological sovereignty is strong enough to break the chains of dependency once and for all? If you believe this story deserves to be heard, please share it. If you feel proud to be among the first to witness Africa's technological awakening, let your voice be counted. And if you believe, as we do, that truth matters more than headlines, then subscribe today, because the future is not waiting. It is already being built in Africa.